What up, what up, what up? Welcome into another edition of Green with Envy. As always, this is your boy Will Weir checking in. How you doing? How you living? Joining me today to help break down everything that went right and mostly what went wrong in that third quarter against the Miami Heat in game one of the Eastern Conference Finals. We've got my podcasting cousin from across the pond, the leader of the Taylor gang. Adam Taylor is here to help break it all down. Cue it.
Before we break any laws, I'll stop that real quick.
There
What's
we go.
going on, my God? Do you know how long I've been meaning to just cue that music up for when you intro me?
I mean, this is where we got to get on Greg, right? Greg's our audio producer here. We gotta get the audio producer to cut that up and just have that playing in the background each time we do the intro.
I also think it's just a sick beat.
It's a sick beat. It may also be illegal for us to go pull that. So who knows? We might be breaking some bylaws on that. But how you doing, man? How are you feeling after the Boston Celtics do what they do in the truest Boston Celtic form fashion, drop game one of the Eastern Conference Finals to the Miami Heat 123-116? Before we get into all the breakdowns, just tell me how you feeling. Tell me what's going on in your world.
I'm surprisingly good. Like, if the Celtics are going to blow a game, they're going to blow it in the third quarter. That was the same in the bubble in the Eastern Conference Finals, all the way up to it under Brad Stevens. It was very similar under Ime Udoka during the early part of his tenure, and then it kind of crept in and out throughout the playoffs last season. And then it's been an issue for Joe in and out of the season. Just third quarter struggles are ingrained in this Celtics team's DNA.
So you know what's weird about that, Adam? And I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off there, cool. but I saw you tweet that earlier, and so I looked it up because it certainly was in the bubble. That was the prevailing. You know, every Celtics fan was worried before the third quarter even got started about what was going to happen. And the weird part about that is last year in the regular season, and it carried over into this year's regular season, net rating as far as the third quarter goes, the Celtics were the best team in the NBA in the regular season last year. This year, they were second in net rating in the third quarter. So it's weird because they've turned it into a strength in the regular season. But I went back and looked at last year's playoffs. And last year's playoffs, aside from a few teams that were eliminated in the first round, any team that had a substantial playoff run, they were second to last, only ahead of the Phoenix Suns, who obviously got just destroyed in game 7 of the second round last year. That was the only team that advanced more than one round that was worse than them. And this year, it's a very similar pattern. I believe only the Sixers were worse than them in the third quarter. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that the Celtics dominated the third quarter of game 7. So it's a really confounding issue with this team that has been a strength in the regular season after it being, you know, such a detriment to them in the bubble that it felt like that was a point of emphasis that a lot of this core grabbed onto and made it a strength. But it keeps coming up in the third quarter that you're right. It's been bad last postseason, and it's been bad again this postseason.
Yeah, and even when they're having good stretches of third quarter play during the regular season, you'll still have that 1 to 4 game stretch where they stink it up out of their break. And like I say, I do think it's part of the team's DNA. As you've kind of put it out there, they've definitely done work on removing that negative kind of impact that those thirds have. But once the playoffs come, it's back again. And I don't know whether it's when the pressure's on them. I don't know whether it's when they're going in with a lead and they're coming back out. Like, it is what it is. And look, we was on Instagram Live yesterday. If you're not following either Adam Taylor NBA or Green with Envy over on Instagram, and you're on Instagram, you should be. We go live before every game. And we're just kind of chopping it up. We're talking about, like, hey, you know, we think this is going to be, if Miami are going to win, it's going to be a Jimmy Butler game, or it's going to be that Spo puts together a really good game plan and the role players step up. And the role players stepped up, and you have to sit back, tip your cap, and be like, yeah, I don't think that Kyle Lowry is going to have a smoking hot second quarter again. I don't think that Max Strus is going to shoot lights out off pull-ups consistently. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, I can understand the frustration. Like, this is game 1. You're coming in off the back of a big win in game 7 against Philly. You're back in front of the home team. You've lost 50% of your games at home throughout this postseason. I think you're 4-8. 4-8. Like, I get the frustration, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, man, can Miami sustain what they did? Like, can they realistically sustain the production off the bench?
You know who else asked themselves that? The Milwaukee Bucks. the New York Knicks. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing with the Miami Heat. It feels unsustainable, but sometimes it is. But in order to help us get reset here and kind of dive into everything, let's do what we do, and let's cue up that morning box score. Morning box score, Game 1 Eastern Conference Finals. The Miami Heat, the Cinderella slipper still fits. 123-116. They take down the Boston Celtics in the TD Garden, take a 1-0 series lead. Of course, we got to talk about Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler was jimmying last night. 35 points, 5 rebounds, 7 assists, 6 steals, just doing a little bit of everything. Gets to the free throw line 10 times. Bam Adebayo, 9 of 13 from the field, 8 rebounds, 20 points, 5 assists for him. Really full night on the stat line. And then, as Adam already talked about, the role guys for Miami, just 4 different guys score 15 points. Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, Caleb Martin, and Kyle Lowry all chip in with 15 points apiece, including some stellar 3-point shooting, as the Miami Heat shot 16 of 31 from the 3-point line. For the Celtics, let's take a look there. Jason Tatum, 30 points, 7 rebounds, 1 assist, did have 4 turnovers, got to the line 11 times, though, which is always going to be important. Jaylen Brown, 22 points on 10 of 21 shooting, did have 9 rebounds and 5 assists, but unfortunately also had 6 turnovers, 10 turnovers combined for the Jays. That's always going to be a little bit of a rough mark to kind of get by. Marcus Smart, 13 points, 11 assists for him, 19 points for Malcolm Brogdon off the bench, but simply just not enough, Adam. Biggest thing that we have to start with here is that third quarter, which we already started to touch on here, is that third quarter in which it really all fell apart. Celtics go into the half with a lead. They were up, Celtics were up 66-57 at the half. Third quarter, Miami goes on a 46-25 run. They win the quarter 46-25. Just a brutal quarter. The only quarter Miami wins in the entire night. The Celtics win quarter 1, 2, and 4, but 3 was such a large disparity that it did not matter. The Heat are now up 1-0, best of 7. So, Adam, looking at that third quarter, we heard some of the quotes about mentality and, Jaylen Brown talked about we played it like it was a regular season. It's the Eastern Conference Finals. We need to wake up. And I mean, cut, copy, paste. We heard that last round. We heard that last year. I don't know why this team does that, and they acknowledge it. So they say I can't explain that part of it. But from what you saw on the court, what were the biggest difference makers in that third quarter that led to a record-setting 46 points for the Heat?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most prominent one was definitely transition defense, right? There was a few times where, there was a time where Bam caught a rebound. There was about 4 Celtics defenders closer to the halfway line than him, and Bam outpaced all of them, got downhill, dispatched Marcus Smart with one little bump, and then finished. Under no circumstances, I get it, Bam's quick, he's shifty, he's got good hands. Greg put it in a really good way. He's a forward used as a big man, not a big man in the traditional sense. But in no circumstances should Bam be outpacing you all the way down the floor while dribbling the ball and not being able to slow him down or at least take away the rim. But that's what happened. There was a few times where that happened. You saw guys kind of slipping out early, like Miami were leaking out. Nobody was tracking back. And then one of my biggest things was there was a few times where a shot come up. There was a play in the third, Marcus Smart, and I wrote about this one in today's Celtics Film Room newsletter. Go check it out. I wrote Marcus Smart threw a lob for Rob in that third. As that pass leaves Marcus's hand, you'd expect guys to start kind of like making their way backwards, right? Even just to the halfway line, half court line. And then you're like, you're in the half court. Now what I need to do if you guys get the rebound, we're already halfway there. We just try and pick you up at a decent size pickup point, make life tough, force you into a half court set. Well, that's not what happened. Instead, everyone stands there and waits to see whether Rob finishes the lob. Mm-hmm. Everyone from Boston, that is. 2 guys from Miami leaked out straight away. You know what I mean? And I think that to me was kind of a big issue that I'd want to hit as a talking point, was just commitment to transition defense, commitment to those little details, which even Marcus Smart said during his post-game press conference, sometimes we get tired of executing them. But it's those little details that really hurt you in your transition defense. You'll hear coaches say all the time, build out to the ball. So that means get back in transition. The first guy covers the rim. and then your next two guys back step up, and then you build out to where the ball is. Don't allow the ball to dictate where your defense is. Get there first and build out towards it.
Yeah, it's in an article today written by Jared Weiss here. I want to quote, I want to steal a line that he has in here because I think it was really representative of this game. Boston has the talent to win the series, but the Heat showed the difference between a team that wins 3 quarters and a squad that plays 48 minutes. And that really was, I think that was a really great line from Jared right there. That is really telling of what happened in this game. And, you talk about getting out in transition. The Celtics certainly didn't do enough of that on offense in the second half. And then you look at Miami being able to kind of flip that for themselves. And you saw the Kevin Love outlet passes, right? He had 2-3 outlet passes in that third quarter that led to easy buckets. And so you look at the Celtics and their defensive locked inness is not a word, but their ability to lock in the third quarter, which just wasn't there. And they turned it back on in the fourth quarter a bit and had a much better quarter. But why they come out in the third quarter like that, it is just very, very hard to understand what it is. And to the Heat's credit, they came out and this is kind of what we talked about in that IG Live, right? At some point last night, Miami's going to punch the Celtics in the mouth and say, how mentally tough are you? And they cracked. They cracked in that third quarter, and Miami stepped on their throat in that third quarter just with their mentality, with that strength. And then you saw the Celtics start to have these communicative breakdowns. And I thought the most representative of that was at the end of the third quarter. Max Strus gets a wide open 3 because Malcolm Brogdon and Al Horford are not sure to go help on Kyle Lowry driving or stick with Cody Zeller at the 3-point line. And apparently, for some reason, that caused enough confusion that Horford was helping on the drive. Brogdon was closer to Cody Zeller than he was to closing out on Max Strus. Max Strus gets a massive 3 to end that third quarter, which was already abysmal. But to end it on that note, just really kind of summed up, what was happening in that quarter. And then you look Miami outscores the Celtics in the paint that quarter 18-10. They outscore them from the 3-point line. And this is another big thing, Reggie Miller and the crew from last night hammered it home. Very similar to game 1 against Philly last night. Very similar. All the 60-plus points in the paint, under 33-point attempts, 27 last night for the Celtics. Almost, I think, identical to what they had against Philly. And the 3-point line has to be an area they cannot lose to the Miami Heat. And they lost last night overall in the game, but 18-9 in that third quarter. And, as Greg talked about a few episodes ago, Strus got loose. The Strus juice was out.
And this is the thing, right? Like I said it at the start of this episode, I don't trust in Miami's role players to do what they did in game 1 consistently. But the fact that they did it in game 1, especially in that third quarter, has to be concerning because this Miami team is defying everyone at the moment. Boston, as Royce put it, Boston do have the ability to win this series, but the execution just wasn't there on either side of the floor. If you look at what they did offensively, I think one of my biggest issues there was, guys are standing around off ball. It's very much that end of it was very bubble-like, high pick and roll offense. The floor spaced exceptionally well. No one's cutting, no one's moving. There's very minimal off-ball action going on, no pin downs, no rotations. And then you're letting Tatum go 1-on-5 because he's got no kick-out options. And I understand that people will be like, well, he has Marcus Smart on one side of the floor, Jaylen Brown on the other. But if they're not lifting out of the corner or like sinking in to kind of mirror where the passing lane should be and where Jason Tatum's vision is, what do you expect from the guy? And that was an issue in the third. I'm getting a bit on the feet. And the fourth.
Yeah.
I just honestly, that whole offensive system kind of fell to pieces. Now, I'm not saying that it was great in the first half. I felt that the game was quite even. Boston pulled away a bit in the second. But for the most part, it was a tight game. And then that third quarter comes, Boston come into it with a 9-point lead after the half. And then all of a sudden, Miami just turned up the intensity. And what can you do? I mean, Joe Mazzulla didn't make many adjustments. There weren't loads of timeouts being called. I get that everyone's I think that's low-hanging fruit at this point.
Yeah, and well, here's the thing, because we've talked about it a bunch, right? I do think the timeouts is a thing. I don't think last night that was the issue. I just really don't.
Me neither.
I think in that third quarter when Miami made some of these runs, I think they had that early 13-1 run in the first 4 minutes of the second quarter. maybe that's an area where a timeout could have tried, but at least attempted to quell momentum. But other than that, I didn't really see too many glaring parts of that quarter where a timeout was blatantly obvious and needed to be used. I mean, it could have, but I just don't think that was last night. That was the biggest issue. I just really don't. I do think Spo outcoached Missoula, but once again, that's kind of expected from a 15-year legendary head coach versus a 34-year-old rookie. You're going to have moments like that. Adam, you talked about there's going to be a Spo game. There's going to be a Jimmy game. There's probably going to be a Spo and a Jimmy game. I think we got a little bit closer to that Spo and Jimmy game. But let's take a quick break here, and then let's come back. Let's keep going on. So we'll take a break for 1 second. So we're talking right now, Adam. We've got Spo and Jimmy having, really big nights last night. And let's talk about Jimmy for a minute here because, what this guy's doing in the playoffs is just insane. And by the way, unbelievable call by Kevin Harlan. Jimmy freaking Butler. Like, that was pretty cool. As much as it hurt in the moment, that was pretty cool. But I think the biggest thing, and I'm curious to your thoughts on how the Celtics can correct this. Jimmy last night far, far too easily got to all of his spots, capital HIS, his spots. Wherever he wanted to go, he got there. And I think a little bit of this is going to tie back into Missoula a little bit and some of the lineup choices that were out there as well. Two guys that it really felt like, Jimmy Butler had his eyes set out on attacking, where anytime Rob Williams was in the game, we can talk about Rob's game here for a little bit because there's some good and I think there's some bad with that from last night. Jimmy was relentlessly hunting Rob Williams last night, and Rob did not have much answers for him. And even though Peyton Pritchard was going to, we talked, Adam, you were spot on. Peyton Pritchard was going to get some run in the series, got some run last night. And, I have some thoughts about that, but there certainly were a couple of times where Jimmy went to that matchup and either shot over it or made the Celtics double. And he's just smart enough. He's going to make the right play. And we've talked about the role players stepping up. So, what were your thoughts on how easily Jimmy got to his spots last night and what can be done to deter that look in the game too?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that got me was how Horford and Tatum were kind of the guys picking him up instead of Smart and Brown. I thought that was Missoula was definitely going for length and strength more than athleticism and grit in putting Horford and Tatum on him. I think that it's easy to look at Jimmy and his age and think that, hey, we need to kind of get into him a little bit more with length, disrupt him because he's not going to be able to explode past you. But that's just not the case. Jimmy is super explosive, still very strong, very quick. I was going to say shifty and quick is what I was going for.
I mean, honestly, that's a pretty good description right there. Maybe we just going to get Merriam on the line. We got a new word for you.
So I'd expect to see Brown maybe pick up that assignment in game 2. I think that a lot of it comes down to your help defense as well. One of the things that Miami were doing really well, and we see Boston try and do it, and they're not there yet, is run secondary actions on the weak side. Like you saw in that third quarter alone, I think they run a floppy action 3 times. Miami did. Each time we either Strus or Gabe Vincent coming off the floppy screens, and 2 of the 3 times it was a decoy. It was to get the defense to overload, clog passing lanes, so then you can feed Bam Adebayo, or you can feed Jimmy, or screen for Jimmy to curl. And there's multiple options coming out of that. But what happens is you're removing the nail help. You're removing guys digging in to take away the middle and to really pressure you to pick up the ball early and make a decision on the move. Boston need to be a lot more, I'd say, discipline there. You've still got to react to what's going on the weak side, because if you don't react, that becomes the primary action. That's the whole point of doing it. But you've got to kind of not overcommit. Keep your eye on what's going on the strong side, and then throw Smart on him, throw Brown on him, and stay more compact defensively. The double big lineup just didn't work defensively in this game at all.
I think that's the next area I want to go to here, because that's certainly an area that it felt like trouble. And even in that first half where we haven't touched on too much, because obviously the third quarter dominated the headlines, but in that first half when it felt like things were going really well, the benefit of that double big was Rob was dominating on the offensive glass. Rob had an amazing night on the offensive glass, but defensively, Miami was finding a way to take advantage of what had been such a strength for the Celtics in past series. And that kind of leads into some of the rotation decisions that Mazzulla was making, in my opinion, throughout the game to try to counteract that and to try to get back to, in certain areas, playing with one big. And at different times in both the first half and second half, he went with Peyton Pritchard. No problem with that. I think Peyton Pritchard's a guy that we've talked about before. He's way overqualified for what he is on this team. And I think certainly offensively last night, he felt like a fish out of water. No idea what his responsibility was supposed to be, whether he should be shooting, penetrating. It was clear he was very tentative, in my opinion. And then defensively, it was a little bit strange that at times, if you're going to play Peyton Pritchard, you're going to go with two other guards rather than both Jays to have a little bit more size. It was, him with, and the second half where I wrote down, it was him, I believe it was him, Brogdon, and White with Jalen and then Rob. So it feels like you'd want to size up a little bit, even though we've talked about the guards on this team, the combo guards, the three of them can all kind of guard up in their own way. But that was still kind of an interesting decision for me. And this gets back to, where's Grant Williams? I
wish I knew.
I mean, it feels like that's an area where Grant could have been of use. And, just the automatic assumption at this point that Grant's closer to a DNP than getting 10 minutes. It's still really hard to fathom the exact reasons behind that. It feels like, once again, we talk about, who Jimmy might switch on to. Not by any means saying Grant's shutting down Jimmy, but that's a strong physical body that he's going to feel at least. Whereas, whether it's Rob, he can get that quick shifty action you talked about, or a guy like Peyton and even Derek White. He's going to overpower Derek White. As much as Derek White's going to be in his grill and is going to make him work, Jimmy's going to overpower Derek White. So I think Grant's another guy that the Celtics have to consider. And, what were your thoughts on Mazzulla's decisions to play Pritchard and then try to balance the double bigs not working in different lineups that he went to last night?
Yeah, I said on the IG Live last night, this series to me makes sense for Pritchard in terms of giving him a bit of a role to attack Gabe Vincent, giving him a role to attack Kyle Lowry, because I don't think that, especially Lowry, I don't think he's going to be able to keep up with Pritchard on defense. He's going to try and draw flops. He's going to be very good positionally, but if Pritchard gets him off the dribble, I think Lowry's going to struggle. So I understood giving Pritchard an opportunity. I also agree that he just looked completely like a fish out of water. But this is what happens when you're out of the rotation for so long and then put into a position where it's like, dude, this is the instant conference finals. You've played 12 minutes of playoff basketball. What are we doing here? Like, you're just throwing things at the wall again. But as I said on the IG Live last night, Mazzulla makes a change. He's ridiculed for it. You don't know what you're doing. You haven't got an answer. But if he doesn't make a change, we're calling for him to make a change. The dude can't win. So I'm not going to rip on Mazzulla's decision. I think it was, theoretically, it made sense in a small sample size. Grant Williams, I'm not going to say who I was speaking to, but I spoke to a Division I coach earlier today, just kind of like, hey, why isn't Grant Williams playing? Like, again, he could do a job against Bam. He could do a job against Jimmy. He's one of the stronger guys on the floor. And the answer I got back was, I've got no fucking clue.
Yeah.
And we're talking, this is a high-ranking Division I coach. He's not a head coach, but he's on one of the best teams in Division I. I don't know what division they're playing.
ACC,
in the ACC, because I'm not in America. But even people that are in the industry don't really have an answer. Maybe Joe and Grant just don't see eye to eye. Maybe there's something going on that we're not sure of, not aware of. But this feels like, at this point, if Grant's not getting minutes now, his season's basically done. You're an emergency valve then when, nothing else is working, let's put Grant in. To me, he should have been a core part of this rotation all the way through. I had him marked down as the 7th or 8th guy in the rotation.
Oh, easily. We all did.
Yeah,
all did. I think the way that most of us looked at it, we've been saying a lot, there's 7 starters on this team, right? You have 7 guys that could be stars on any team. Grant's not in that, but he's the first one that you would consider a very solid substitution, reserve, spot starter. He was right in that level just below. And so to go from where he was at to like I said, it's almost expected he's getting a DNP each game. And if we do see him, which I think there's a chance we see him in game 2. Listen, Mazzulla has, taken a lot of criticism, and there's times where he takes that in and he makes adjustments. He does, is it going to be in the game? Not always, but I would be very surprised if we didn't see Grant for at least some time. And that's the thing. I don't think either of us are sitting here, Adam, saying why is Grant Williams not playing 25 to 30 minutes? But we're saying for a guy that was playing, 20 to 25 minutes pretty regularly in the regular season, he's not out there for 10 to 12 minutes a game. Like, that just seems like there's some type of disconnect. And I don't know if that changes the game last night, but I think it certainly stood out because in the 12 minutes that Peyton Pritchard played, it was kind of unclear as to, even if this is a good matchup, like you're saying, it was kind of unclear as to what his role was when you actually look at that game last night. What did they want to do with Pritchard? It was pretty unclear to me.
Yeah, it felt like, look, I said on the OG Live, if you're going to use Pritchard, you use him as an off-ball screener and you use him as a spot-up shooter. Those are the two reasons you put him on the floor. You're not asking him to be a ball handler at this point in the year. You're not asking him to initiate plays at this point in the year. Sure, if it flows into that, then you're not going to try and escape out of it. You have trust in him. That's why he's on the floor. But primarily, his role is we're going to run a small to big screen, an inverted screen. So then we're going to create a good mismatch. It's something that Udoka used Pritchard for extensively during the playoffs last season. And then we're going to try and hit Pritchard on the pop. But with Grant, you've got so much more you can do. You can go to your own elbow series with Grant the same way you do with Tatum. You can go to flex actions to get Grant driving baseline with the ball because he added that to his game this year. There's so many wrinkles that Grant brings to that offense that could have helped against a Miami defense that when it went zone and it zoned up, it did kind of shake Boston a little bit for a while. And you expect that. We spoke about that. Boston found a way to break it open. And, I've seen some people be like, this is a zone defense. You shouldn't be playing this in the NBA. You play it in high school. Well, it knocked out the Milwaukee Bucks. It knocked out the New York Knicks. And it has previously knocked out the Celtics. Yeah. So if it works, you run with it.
That's the adjustment.
Yeah, and you're quick enough to call him the best coach in the NBA, but then you ridicule his defensive adjustments. It makes no sense to me. But so I understand. Sorry, go ahead. I was just rambling at that point anyway.
Well, no, I was going to say. So we're talking about Peyton Pritchard here, but I think we do need to, because we'll see what the adjustment is going into game 2 when it comes to the lineups. Yeah. Is it Pritchard? Is it Grant? I don't think that's it's certainly a part of what happened last night, not the main reason. Let's go to a few other aspects here, from the Celtics standpoint. And the next one I want to go to is, so there's this guy on the Celtics. He scored 51 points in game 7 3 days ago.
He's humbly one of the best players in the world.
Humbly. Second half of last night, he has 4 field goal attempts in the entire second half last night. Now, listen, he got to the line 8 times, so some of these field goal attempts, he did obviously, take 4 more shots, getting to the free throw line or, driving to the basket. But 4 shots for Jason Tatum, even though Marcus Smart and Malcolm Brogdon in the second half went 3 of 6, Jaylen Brown was 5 of 11. That's okay. Like, there just needs to be more Jason Tatum. And it felt like from a large stretch of the third into the first half of the fourth quarter, Tatum just wasn't touching the ball enough for a guy that just scored 51 points in game 7 and for the guy who went on a heater in game 6 to save your season, after he nearly destroyed it himself, to be fair. But he then saved your season in game 6 against the Sixers. And then by the time he started touching the ball again, he fell apart. He had some really bad turnovers at the end of that. So, it's a little confusing to figure out what to make of this Jason Tatum game, because once again, stat line looks really good, looks really nice. 30 points, bunch of rebounds, some assists, the 4 turnovers. The timing of them was more the issue than I think the amount, because they came 3 pretty consecutively, in that fourth quarter. But what do you make of Tatum's game from last night?
Yeah, I mean, first things first, that taking those 4 field goals in the second half, Shaq addressed that in the TNT post game. I don't know if you've seen that on YouTube. And he was like, Tatum's got to demand a damn ball. He's got to be like, I am your star player. You give me the ball. I'm going to work. And you're going to run actions that spring me open because I'm the guy that can win us the game and win us the series. And I think that for all the good that Tatum's mentality and demeanor of team first and everything does, and how unselfish he is, there are times where you need him to be like, no, I'm going to do this. And I get it. Sometimes it's not going to work because Tatum can be inconsistent. But I felt like last night he kind of carried that 51-point performance in. He came in with a bit of a swagger. He was looking to attack. That to me is the key. I understand when Jaylen Brown doesn't have great lots of shots down the stretch, and I'm very, very vocal about he should get the ball more in the third and fourth quarters when he doesn't. But under no circumstances should your number one guy only be taking 4 shots down the stretch.
And the weird part about it was, right, because like you said, we've asked for certain times Jaylen Brown should be more involved than he is. And I think last night they started the fourth quarter kind of working through Jaylen Brown, right, in that first half.
They featured him a lot more than what they usually do.
And I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but the nights that we're typically asking for it are the nights where, and Jaylen Brown was okay in this game. It wasn't his greatest game. It wasn't his worst game. But you know, the nights that we're typically asking for are the nights where Jaylen's just cooking everybody. Jaylen all of a sudden looks like old school T-Mac, and for some reason we're throwing him in the corner, or he's off ball, not really touching it. And that's when it gets really confusing. You know, right now, when we talked about this pregame, Tatum gets on these runs where he just gets really, really hot. And, you know, building off game 6 into game 7, you know, I'd want Jason Tatum to touch the ball as much as possible and get 25 to 30 shots last night. That personally would have been something that I'm looking for. And, you know, collectively as a whole, I know Missoula's not going to be happy with the amount of 3-point attempts the Celtics had last night. Part of that, I think, was in design by Miami, because that's what Eric Spoelstra probably has seen, that, hey, when this team, you know, shoots under, you know, 33s, they want to shoot 40 plus. They want to shoot 40 to 50. You know, holding the Celtics under 30 attempts, that's a minor victory in itself, right? That's a victory for Spo and the Heat coaching staff. And, you know, only 3-point attempts from Jason Tatum last night. You know, whether this is the thing that is really hard to determine as a fan watching from home. Is this a Jason Tatum thing, as Shaq is saying, or is this a Joe Mazzulla thing where there needs to be more either plays or emphasis on getting Tatum the ball, or does Tatum need to be that dude who comes out and says, get the F out of my way, give me the ball, I'm Jason F. and Tatum?
Well, from what I've seen watching I'd say since early in the second round, Missoula's gone quite heavily away from calling plays from the sidelines. Mm-hmm. So, like, and I know this because I scrub through games to try and note down plays that I can then break down on a social media post, and they are very concept based. I get the way the team plays is concept
random in the Marcus Smart sense that
it's very much like, hey, we see this, we're going to flow into this, right? But then you look at what Miami did, and Miami were running so much good stuff that was clearly by design. It was principle-based, but they were flowing into it. And I think that's kind of a disconnect with where the Celtics are right now, right? They've got their scheme, they've got their principles in place. They know that it's like a flow chart, right? You can go to multiple different options.
If this, then that.
Yeah.
Or this, and then you have 2 options.
Yeah, this, then that, or that. Like, it's like code. Mm-hmm. But I think that they haven't adjusted to having such a fluid freedom of choice in their play that they flow into those actions. They'd sooner flow into like a pick and roll, and then maybe they'll run something else, right? Mm-hmm. And then you watch Miami play, and they're featuring Jimmy Butler off of a floppy or a flex, or they ran one where it was a flare into an exit, which then ended up in a gut DHO. And you're like, dude, you just ran 3 different actions just to create a driving lane. Like, it had nothing else to do with the fact other than opening a lane for Jimmy to get down. Boston have to get to that level, especially if you're trying to feature a guy like Tatum that's going to have so much defensive attention on him naturally, the same way Jimmy does. Mm-hmm. You need to string together actions. You need to string together different ideas that each could turn into a scoring opportunity themselves. But if they don't, that's because you're fine with that, because it was always ran to give Tatum an opportunity to get to his spot, right? And I feel like they just didn't do that. I don't know whether that's a lack of decision-making. I think Smart done a great job of playmaking in the first half, then just completely fell off the grid in the second. What was it? 10 assists in the first, 1 in the
10 assists, 0 turnovers in the first half, only 1 assist in the second half.
And this is the thing, right? I think if you want good things to happen, when you get a game like that from Marcus Smart, you bleed it dry. Mm-hmm. You try and get him into that 15, 16, 17 assist range. That's hard to do. I'm not saying he would have got there last night, but I'm saying that he could have been close. And maybe you find extra scoring opportunities. You don't then just be like Tatum, just take a back seat, which is what you were asking, and I went a roundabout way of saying it. Like, I don't think this is a Tatum or Mazzulla thing. I think this is a Tatum and Mazzulla thing. I think Tatum should be calling plays that free him up, or demanding the ball and then initiating something himself. And if Mazzulla sees it's not working, you don't even need to call a timeout. Just shout out a play from the sidelines. Do you know what I mean? Or shout out a series. Like, we're going elbow. Okay, cool. Whatever they their code word for elbow is, right, we're going to feed Tatum on the elbow. Now we're going to do some shit around it. So it's an and problem, not an either or, in my personal opinion.
No, I like that. I think that's probably right. Tatum and Mazzulla. I think that's probably a pretty good way to put it. Before we move on here and take a quick break and go to setting up game 2, one other thing I just feel like has to be noted here. Al Horford, man, that cold streak, I thought we were moving away from it. It's still there. 1 of 5 last night. Obviously he's so important on the defensive end, but the Al Horford regressing to a sub 30% 3-point shooter in the postseason has been really backbreaking for this offense. And, that's something I think we just have to continue to keep an eye on.
Antarctic Al.
Antarctic Al. I like that. Unfortunately, hopefully we need to change that. We need Equator Al. We need Equator Al back in the picture here. But all right, let's take a quick break and then let's set up game 2 for everybody. All right, Adam. So Celtics doing what the Celtics do, right? They make it tough on themselves, and that's part of the reason why I think you and I are pretty calm right now having this conversation today. Just, I don't know. I mean, I said the series was going to go 7 because I don't know why. That's the blatant truth. It's going to go 7, and I don't know why. The Celtics tend to do this. They make things harder on themselves. They are their own worst enemies. And, Eric Spoelstra is a maestro and Jimmy are maestros of flipping your weaknesses against you. And that's what we're going to see several times in this series. It's going to happen again in some form or fashion. But looking ahead to game 2 here, now what becomes a must-win game, which to the Celtics' credit, when they put themselves in these places for adversity, more often than not, they show up. And they show up in a big way. And I'm expecting that again. I'm expecting the Celtics to rebound with a very loud game 2. I think this will be a game that they really put their mark on. Miami knows they've already accomplished what their first goal is, which is to just get a split. That's the first thing. If they can win 2, Jimmy's certainly going to go for that throat. But they've accomplished the main goal coming in here. So I got a couple questions I want to run through here. We've touched on some of these throughout. Now I kind of want to know, Adam, what would you do if you were Joe Mazzulla? If you slept with duct tape on your mouth, what would be the answer that you come to in the morning when you arise as to what to do on Friday night at the TD Garden? Let's start with the starting lineup. Move to the double big, back to the double big, I should say, in game 6 of the Philadelphia series. Obviously that worked for game 6, game 7. Celtics advanced to the Eastern Conference Finals. We talked about earlier it not having, or it being a struggle at times, especially with Jimmy, Honey, and Rob. Starting lineup, game 2. Do you think it stays the same, or does Mazzulla go for a change already?
If I'm Mazzulla, I stick with it. I think it sends a bad message to you guys after the first loss since going back to double big to then nix it. That shows that you did it. Like, you've got to understand that a lot of the players were very vocal about their happiness in having Rob back in that starting 5.
Yeah, that was actually really interesting to hear that about how much of a difference it made just going to that, and how much the players have wanted this apparently for a longer time than we knew.
So going away from that after one loss to me seems super counterproductive. I think it could have a ripple effect in morale. Mm-hmm. So I'd stick with that personally. Now, just because you start double big doesn't mean you have to stay there very long. You could run it for 3 minutes and then pull Rob, pull Al, whatever you need to do, right? But I'd have a game plan that it'd be like, right, if Al's not shooting great to begin, then I'm going to pull Al early, put Grant in, get Grant to play that Al role where Grant can take the same type of threes, Grant can do the same type of defense. We call him Baby Al for a reason, right? This was the guy that was up until about 6 or 8 weeks ago, or maybe a bit longer, maybe 12 weeks ago at this point, was seen as the long-term replacement for Al. So I'd literally do a like-for-like replacement. You lose a bit with the defensive IQ. You gain a bit because Grant's actually not Antarctic right now, and that's not a dig on Al. He's been fantastic.
We don't know. We haven't seen Grant play in a while.
I'd expect Grant to be like, yeah, I'm going to make 15 threes over the next 2 games just to kind of rub Joe's nose in it, right?
Well, here's the thing. We know he'll take him. He'll take him. I mean, we look back to game 7 last year against Milwaukee, the famous game 7, if he needs to take 18 threes, which hopefully that won't be every game, but if he needs to, he will. And so I agree with you. I think it's too early, even if we saw some holes in that double big last night against Miami. I think it's too early for that. Like you said, maybe there's an adjustment later in the series to go away from it. But right now, I don't think you do. But that was me. My next question was talking about Grant. I think you already hit that, is that the adjustment is, if you want to stay big, you maybe replace the Pritchard minutes with Grant Williams minutes. I mean, you can find a way to have them both on the court as well. But I think at the very minimum, I would at least flip those or find a way to put them even out there together, because I think if you do go Pritchard, I think you need a little bit more size in the court. I thought they were a little bit too small when they're running Peyton Pritchard out there with two other guards. So
I'd also just want to put in there that I'd try and stagger the Rob and Brogdon minutes as much as possible.
Yeah, it's not a great defensive combo.
Defense is bad, but also offensively, you're not really getting the full Rob effect because of how much Brogdon looks off him. I thought that when those two came off the bench together, it was a bit disjointed because of that. Rob wasn't in a position to succeed. Brogdon would come in, like, it never really happened, but he was in a position to get some unfair criticism for playing the way he plays, playing the way you brought him into play.
Yeah, I mean, the Brogdon thing is interesting, right? Because I think even last night, even though his stat line, he had 19 points last night, and, he was one of the few guys that was, that shot the ball pretty well last night. Some of his decision making was a little bit questionable. I felt like, but to your point, I think some of that's a byproduct of what we've asked him to be
exactly
for this team,
and then putting him alongside a big that he's not going to utilize. That big's majority of his offense comes from being utilized as a role man. It's unfair on both parties. Do you know what I mean? Brogdon to me would play better alongside a Grant or a Horford, where there's a pick and pop big that's not going to clog up the lane a little bit, that doesn't rely on lob passes and dump offs to get the majority of their impact offensively. That makes more sense to me. So that'd be the only other major change I made, was stagger the Rob and Brogdon minutes.
Not a lot of Brogdon to Robert Williams lobs that I can picture off the top of my head right now.
I ran the stats by you the other week. Do you remember? I done the numbers.
I don't remember off the top of my head. No,
I don't remember off the top of my head either. But it was like 5% of the pick and rolls that Rob and Brogdon have been in, Brogdon's assisted Rob.
Yeah,
and it's just low.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds about right. So I think that is a good call out to try to stagger those, and I think we will see more lineups in which the Celtics are only going traditionally one big, whatever you want to call, Grant Williams, if he gets some minutes out there. But let's look to the other side for the Miami bigs. A guy that we haven't really talked about was Bam Adebayo. I thought Bam played a pretty solid game last night. One of the keys that I talked about was making him a scorer, which is a little bit playing with fire. Because I said the similar thing about PJ Tucker. That's a whole different beast. PJ Tucker stands in one spot, does nothing. That was just, something that really got at me, that he didn't take a single shot in game one of last series. But that's last series. We're done with that. This series, Bam Adebayo, he takes 13 shots. Last night it goes 9 of 13. I think for me, I still think there is a long game in making Bam into a scorer, but he got a lot of easy shots last night. Let's just be real about it. They didn't force him to take a lot of mid-range jumpers. And I think that's the area that you need to get to try to force his hand a little bit to be more of that scorer. But to his credit, to Jimmy's credit, to the Heat credit, they found ways to be able to utilize him, so that he was scoring, he was being aggressive, but he was getting very good looks while doing it. And this is very similar to Jimmy getting his shots. Bam got shots that he's an all-star, right? Like, it is playing with fire, saying, hey, can Bam go score points? Yeah, of course he can, especially when you give him easy looks, but can you make him score them in ways that he's not used to? So I'm curious to know what your thoughts were on the approach to Bam in game one, which Stan Van Gundy called out a lot. Celtics were happy to go kind of one-on-one with him and not bring that double. And what would you do in game two? And what do you think is the best strategy going forward against Bam?
Yeah, so we spoke about this on IG again. Like, I'm not trying to plug IG that much. I'm really not. But a lot of these discussion points we kind of overlooked yesterday. So I just kind of want to everyone, like people.
And if you guys want to come tune in on Friday, we'll have an IG live. I don't know if you guys have heard, we do IG live before most pre-games.
But the thing is, people that are listening now won't most likely have been present during that IG live. So one of the things that we discussed was, what way will Miami utilize Bam in game one, right? And the options we kind of laid out was, he's going to be a rebound, like they're going to put him on the glass, ask him to rebound, get second chance points, be the kick out guy to keep creating second chance opportunities, or they're going to ask him to be a face-up guy that attacks off the dribble, or they're going to utilize him as like a hub. And obviously they're going to do all three, but they were going to feature him in one of those three ways primarily, right? That pick and roll man, who's going to face up and do stuff off the dribble, blah, blah, blah. That was primarily how they used him in game one was, hey, we want you to face up. We want you to do your dribble skills. We want you to try and score off the dribble, pressure that defense. It's a man one-on-one coverage. There's no point to really defer in your handoff actions or anything. So the first thing I'd do was adjust my pickup points, try and use the sideline as an extra defender, especially when he's playing on the wings. So if you need to ice him a little bit, try and do that. But primarily for me, it's all about the pickup points. It's all about not letting Bam catch the ball where he's comfortable. He's going to get to his spots. If he catches the ball comfortably, he's going to get to where he needs to go. So it's all about figuring out how to push him away from those pickup points on that catch. The Celtics did a really good job of that against Embiid, where Embiid like that nail, the nail catch, and like Tatum or someone will get underneath him and kind of make him take 2 or 3 steps away from the nail. So now you've got to take 2 or 3 dribbles just to get to where you wanted to get the ball in the first place. Throws you out of rhythm, puts you into more of a thinking game, and then you can start sending help as he puts the ball on the floor. You can dig, you can switch, you can do a couple of different things. That would be the first way I look to try and beat Bam, while they're trying to use him and put the ball on the floor. And then it's up to Spo to change Bam's role.
Yeah, which, I mean, as we've seen, I'm sure he'll find a way to adjust, but you have to make him seconds. I mean, you have to make him adjust. You have to make him, much like you're talking about, you have to make Bam think. You have to at least make Spo think, make it as challenging on him as you can. But yeah, I mean, Bam was really good in this game. You know, I don't think this was an A+ Bam game. I think we saw one of those last year, and I can't think it was game 3 maybe in the series last year. But between Bam and Jimmy, you know, when you look at the stars, and that's really where Miami, they have to get production from their 2 stars, and then it comes down, you know, to their role players, and usually it's, can we get 2 out of the 4? They had 4 role guys that all pop last night, and that's where the Celtics are in a lot of trouble, because, you know, if Jimmy and Bam are going to have the games they did, which are, you know, playoff Jimmy and Bam, those are the average games, right? Those are the average games that you can expect. And then it comes down to the role guys, and when they get 60 points out of, you know, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, and Caleb Martin, and Kyle Lowry, that's really tough for the Celtics to overcome, you know, if those guys are going to pop. So we've talked about Jimmy. We've talked about Bam. You know, when you look at the role guys, last night, Max Strus goes 3 of 5 from 3. Gabe Vincent goes 3 of 5 from 3. Caleb Martin goes 3 of 7 from 3. Kyle Lowry goes 3 of 5 from 3. You said before, and I agree with you, minus Strus, because Strus, I think, is actually, you know, when he's on, he can be an elite shooter. You know, Vincent, Martin, Lowry, those guys, I think it's a little bit more expected that they could regress. If you're going to give Strus open looks, though, Strus will knock them down. The other guys, I think there could be a little bit more regression to the mean. But when we look at the role players, which are being consistently set up by Bam and Jimmy and a couple of those Kevin Love outlet passes, what do you think is the counter for the Celtics with those role guys? What can they do to kind of keep them at bay and not let all of them go off? Because that's when the Celtics are going to have a really hard time. That's when Miami's going to be able to get to that offense. That's sometimes where they struggle finding offense. But last night, no trouble doing that. What's the answer in game 2?
Honestly, there isn't one. If the role players are going to go off, they're going to go off. Now, the thing that got to me was role players generally play better at home than they do in like an away game. That wasn't the case. You know, multiple role players found their rhythm in this game. So finding ways to make those passes a little bit later, make them a little bit lower or a little bit higher. The main thing a spot-up shooter wants is to receive the pass directly in their shooting pocket. So if you're impacting Jimmy and Bam enough to make those passes a little bit more errant, to make them a little bit more so you have to stretch to get them, or you have to come up or low. Mm-hmm. Well, now there's an extra step involved. There's no rhythm. That rhythm's broken. Do that consistently. Put them in a position where they have to work to get their shots, even just as simple as catching the ball. Find a way to, you know, if they're running Max Strus off double screens, find a way to meet him at the line. If you have to peel switch, fine, do it. Joe Mazzulla doesn't seem to be a huge fan of peel switching, but I think that against Miami, it's going to be something you need to implement at times when they're bringing guys off stagger screens that are so good, like Max Strus, at getting their hips aligned to the basket, literally as they're spotting up to catch the ball. Everything just lines up. I also think if Strus starts going off, to hell with Grant Williams, match fire with fire, put Sam Hauser in there, and then kind of run similar actions. And let's see, you know, if you want a shootout, it's going to have to be that way. Yeah. But it's like a Western. Have you ever seen Legend with Tom Hardy?
I have not. No.
Oh, so there's a scene in there like so it's based on the Craze from London, like they were twins, London gangsters back in the old days.
Okay.
But there's a scene in there, you can search it up, it's everywhere. And they turn up at a bar, like a pub, an English pub, for a shootout, and one of the guys brings like a metal bar instead of a gun. And this guy, and Tom Hardy, one of his characters, is like, a shootout is a fucking shootout. It's like a western. And when I said it, that kind of was what I was alluding to. You got to watch it, better than me.
I'll check it out.
But for sure, like, that's what I'd do. I'd look to make it difficult for guys on the catch. And that doesn't necessarily mean pressuring the role players, because you can't leave the stars open or add less pressure to a star by throwing digs and doubles and what have you.
To a degree, it's a tip of the cap last night, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, you guys did what we don't expect you to do, right?
But it's something as simple as making a pass be a bit too fast or a bit too high that can give you that extra 0.5 of a second, that extra second for you to rotate back out and actually be able to impact the shot. Because there's a difference between contesting a shot and impacting a shot. Yeah. You know, so that extra 0.5.
These are the little things that Marcus Smart was talking about that they just didn't lock into on the third. I talked about, that I think that Max, if you want to go back and watch the last shot of the third quarter, that's a perfect representation of what we're talking about. That Max Strus corner three with Brogdon and Horford just not being connected on what the call was, and that leads to, as Adam's laying out here, those role players having a chance to go off. So, having said that, Adam, let's put a bow on this episode here. We got game 2, Friday night, the TD Garden. Give me your prediction about what you think happens.
Tatum 51 points leads you to a massive win.
So game 7 replay. Game 7 on replay. I mean, I think we've just seen the script with this team time and time again, right? Celtics win by double digits. And listen, like, I feel... I've said this before. Me and Adam, I don't feel terrible about. I don't feel great, certainly, about last night, but I also don't feel terrible. I don't feel the way I felt after Game 5 against Philly. I don't feel the way that I felt at the end of Game 4 against Philly in the way that collapsed. I don't feel the way I felt after Game 5 against Atlanta and how that all went down. I just don't feel that way. I know there was a really, really bad quarter, and the execution, was certainly lacking, and there was too many turnovers in that fourth quarter. It was just kind of a mess offensively. But, I still feel good about this series. This is, I think, just mentally, because this is our third go-around with the Heat, I'm just more mentally prepared that even though we've been on multiple shows, multiple IG Lives, which we'll be back doing again on Friday, in case you haven't heard, IG Live, Friday before the game, we'll be on there. And, the Celtics should have the advantage in almost everywhere besides coaching. And this should be a series that the Celtics win in 5-6 games. It's just not going to happen. It's not. It's going 6 or 7.
Let me just point this out as well. Yeah. When the Celtics lose, it's a tough loss. They fight. They have a bad quarter. Like Joe said, we won 3 or 4, but the one we lost was the one that cost us the game. When Boston win, it's demoralizing for the other team. They don't just eke out a victory. They really, really take it. They spank you. They put you over their knee, and they really let you have it. So that, to me, is going to be a test for Miami. I don't think they've had a true ass kicking during this postseason run that I've seen, where it's been like, yo, you for everything you had at us, but we came in with a chip on our shoulder because you beat us in the last game and we absolutely destroyed you. And I think if Boston do that, then the momentum swings all the way in their favor, even at a tied series, because I don't think Miami have had their jaw rocked yet. It's gonna be one of the first haymakers they've really taken this run, and that, to me, is going to tell you a lot more about how this series is going to go. I predicted Celtics in 6. I'm not changing that prediction.
I got season 7, and I stand by it because I don't think the series is going to make any damn sense.
No,
so
of course not.
So just strap in, folks. We're going to be here for 2 weeks with you guys breaking down this series. That's basically what I think is going to happen, and why last night was not entirely surprising. But game 2. Celtics got to punch back. There's no other way. There's no other way. They just have to. They got to find that fight. They got to jump back into it. And when they do, we'll be here to break it all down. So we will be following along game by game here. We will have you guys covered on YouTube. Make sure you are following, subscribing on Spotify, Apple, wherever it is that you listen to your podcast. And then, as Adam noted, IG Live will be doing most of our pregame shows on IG Live, usually a couple hours before tip. Just follow us on our social medias. We'll let you know the timings of those each day. But Adam, That's going to do it for this one. Celtics down 1-0, best of 7, back at it Friday night. Appreciate you joining me to break this all down. On the way out here, you are going to hear some music from our guy, Greg Menakis, and his band down here in Austin, Texas. They are the Black Sheep Optimists. Make sure you follow and subscribe to them as well. We will see y'all after game 2. Peace.